In this bonus episode of the Educational Duct Tape Podcast, I'll be chatting with Scott Nunes about tech coaching, this podcast, teaching during the pandemic, edtech tools after the pandemic, Pear Deck, Nearpod, Flipgrid, Otus, Schoology, speech translation tools, transcription tools, Adobe Spark, burritos, Funko Pops, beards, and more. Let's get to it.
I'm Donnie Piercy, host of the Partial Credit Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast with Jake Miller.
Hello, duct tapers. Welcome in, EDU duct tape friends. Today, I'm sharing with you an interview that I did with Scott Nunes on his show, Education Today. You may remember Scott from when he was on the Educational Duct Tape Podcast in an episode a few months ago. I think it was in October or so. Or from the recent Teachers on Fire Roundtable episode that I also shared in this feed. Scott is the host of one podcast, the Education Today podcast, and the co-host of another podcast, the TNT EdTech podcast. They are both fantastic podcasts, and I think that you should subscribe to them. To nudge you in that direction, I'd like to give you a little sampling of Scott's work on Education Today, and that just so happens to feature yours truly. I hope that you enjoy this extra dose of my thoughts and my silliness. I'll see you all next week when my guest is Joe Marquez. Oh, and by the way, in this episode, or this bonus episode, I should say, I give a shout out to my friend Natasha Rachel, and I mispronounce her name. Sorry about that, Natasha. The good news is Natasha will be on EDU Duct Tape in a few weeks, and I pronounce her name correctly like a dozen times in that episode, so I think we're good. Anyhow, I hope you enjoy this episode of Scott Nunes' podcast, Education Today.
Welcome to Education Today, where we'll explore what is possible in education today by covering everything from cool tech to sound pedagogy, infused with teacher stories, sprinkled with a little fun, and filled with inspiration from around the globe. I'm your host, Scott Nunes, and this is Education Today. Hey, welcome back everyone. This is Education Today. I'm your host, Scott Nunes. You can follow me on Twitter at Mr. Nunes Teach, and as well as Facebook and YouTube now. So check me out on all of those socials. You can also find me on LinkedIn and the Gram. On Instagram, you can follow me at I am Mr. EdTech. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in today. I have a great guest for you today. I think you're going to be quite pleased. And so in this People That I Admire series, I have the GIF King. Now you might be saying, who is that? Who is this GIF King? If you don't know, you're going to find out. It is Mr. Jake Miller from Edu Duct Tape. So you're in for a treat. He's got some tips for you, some shares, going to talk about his journey. But before I get into that, I want to talk about why I admire Jake. And we get into this a little bit on the podcast, but I can think back probably about a year and a half ago. And I was going through Twitter, and I kept seeing these awesome GIFs from people like Jake. And I'm like, wow, man, this is really awesome. And I was trying to share something with a colleague, and I went back, tagged Jake, and was like, hey, where do you have that one instructional GIF on this? I can't even remember what it is right now because it's been a while. And he took the added time to do the research and find out what I was looking for, and he pointed me to a Tony Vincent GIF. So that was so cool. So also shout out to Tony Vincent. He's got some great GIFs. One of the three GIF kings, as I've dubbed them. So we got Jake Miller, Tony Vincent, and Andy Knieven, which we've had on the show. So now I've had two of the three kings. If you had to ask me which one is like the ultimate king, I would say Jake. Jake kills it. He really does. He's just consistent, doesn't mess up, has a whole collection of them in a Google Drive for you to use, fair use. So definitely check that out. If you're not seeing it on his website, let me know. I can look it up for you and share it with you. Just DM me on Twitter at Mr. Nunes Teach, and I'll make sure you get that. It's people like Jake that have inspired me to be willing to do things like that. Jake has gone above and beyond and helped me with things like, hey, I need this. What do you think? And it's been really great. And I'm so blessed to have connected with him in real life too. You don't always get that, especially right now during 2020, during the time of the coronavirus pandemic. There's not a lot of face-to-face, human-to-human interaction. So these digital interactions are becoming more paramount in our lives, right? They really take a precedence, as they rightly should, because we need to connect with people, even if we're a little introverted, right? That doesn't mean we don't like people. That just means we recharge away from people. Being around people can bring us joy, but maybe that's not how we recharge. I'm kind of both. Some people would say, I'm an introvert. I don't know. I think at different times, I said introvert, I meant extrovert. I think at times I'm an introvert. It just really depends. I don't know that I've ever really pinpointed it, other than sometimes when I do a lot of social things, like go to a lot of conferences. Like usually in the summer, I'll do ISTE, I'll do some Q conference, I'll do maybe a couple other small ones, and then I'll do Schoology next. So my whole summer is basically vacationing and conferencing. And so by the end of that, come July, I'm toast. I want to just kind of relax and not do anything and just literally binge watch whatever show is like the coolest and newest right now. But 2020, just made that impossible. And I was really blessed to be able to connect with Jake in person. That was a long-winded way of bringing that up. We connected face-to-face at a Q event at ISTE, and then I saw him here and there throughout ISTE, so it was really cool. Definitely somebody I've been looking up to for a while. He is the man. Super sharp, super smart, and quite a funny guy. I appreciate his humor, and he keeps it real. And when I was on his podcast, he shared a great story with me about how he got to meet Michael Jordan. So one of my all-time heroes. The series had just come out when we recorded this. Actually, it had been out for a while, that Jordan documentary. I can't remember the name right now, but we got into it and he revealed that, and I was just so envious, right? And his setup in the back, if you ever see his podcasting setup, he's got a little Michael Jordan hoop in the back. That's where the conversation all started, and I had that same one, except mine was not given to me by Michael Jordan. So really cool story. Many more jam-packed in this episode. Can't wait for you to hear everything Jake has to share. And a big thank you to Jake. If you're out there listening, brother, thank you so much for your patience on this episode. I know I lagged, but I appreciate you and admire you. Make sure to hang on your seats, folks. Next up, we have Jake Miller from Duct Tape. Jake, thanks so much for being on tonight. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. We've already been goofing around and talking for 20 minutes, so now I'm even better. I was like chilling on the couch with my kids, and I was like, oh, I gotta do this podcast, and I'm like kind of like moped down to the microphone, and now we're laughing and joking and having a good time. So now I'm even better, man. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being on. Thanks for having me on your show too. That was a blast, and we got to go back in time, if you will, and reminisce about the good old days and all of our collectibles and talk about Michael Jordan, like the greatest basketball player ever.
Yes.
But before we get into any of that kind of stuff here, I want to make sure everybody's following you on Twitter at Jake Miller Tech. And what's your website again, Jake?
I am jakemiller.net.
And then where should they find you for your podcast?
So it's eduducttape.com. Technically right now it just kind of bumps them over to jakemiller.net, but I didn't want anybody squatting on that website and making me pay millions of dollars for it someday. So yeah, eduducttape.com.
Right. I've had that happen.
Oh.
So very smart. Yes. Yes. So you were very wise. So I'm here to reassure you of that wise decision.
Nice.
For those who are not familiar with you, which I don't know how they could not be, let us know kind of where you're based out of and what your current role in education is.
So I am in Ohio, and my current role is all of the things. I mean, like, that's what it feels like right now. So
Yes.
I have been in education now for 17 years, and I started off teaching middle school. I jumped on from math to science to STEM, and then I started working as a tech integration coach, and then kind of in my evolution into helping teachers with technology and doing it in my day job as a tech integration specialist, I also developed this passion for doing it on the side too, and supporting people. I didn't want to just support the educators in my own school. I felt like I had ideas and I was learning things. It's like if I'm going to research, I don't know, the differences between Pear Deck and Nearpod for 2 hours, I don't want that. I don't want to just hold that information for myself. I want to help everybody else with that. So, and the same things with all of the tech tools out there. If I learn it, I want to support the other educators. So, I started doing it in my day job in my school, supporting the teachers I worked with. But then I started also doing it on Twitter, as you mentioned, and on my podcast, as you alluded to, the Educational Duct Tape podcast, and on my website, as you mentioned too, and started doing all of those things. Now this year, I'm still doing all that stuff on the side, but my school district has moved me back into a role as a science teacher, which is exciting because I've had 4 years of doing the tech coaching where I've had all these ideas and I've been begging teachers to use them in my school. And now I just get to use them, right? I'm just having a blast doing all these things in class. But yeah, the kind of budget effects of COVID-19 eliminated some tech leadership positions, and I got bumped into the classroom, which, I'm having fun with. I miss being able to do that tech leadership thing, but being in the classroom with the kids is cool. Adds a little energy to my day, talking to some 8th graders. Not that they always bring the energy. Sometimes they come moping into the Google Meet, but we have some fun and build a rapport and have a good time. And then, keep doing the tech stuff on the outside. It's like my life is 24/7 education. I just geek out on it. I just have fun talking about it and working in it.
Yeah, and speaking about geeking out and education and you being back in the classroom, what kind of pro tips do you have for teachers during school reopenings? What should they focus on when they go back?
Yeah. So do you mean in-person school reopenings?
In person or just in general, whether it's hybrid, face-to-face, or remote, something that can kind of apply to all.
I mean, from an education point of view, the biggest thing that I'm focusing on right now as I'm going back into a teaching role is that I am prioritizing my rapport with the kids and the relationships with the kids first. And it's not even I'm doing it with the end goal of being a better, I don't know, having them be better behaved or something like that. I'm really doing it because I know that's what the kids need right now after everything they've been through. So I'm trying to be an advocate for them and be supportive of them and show them that I care and build trust with them so that they can look to me as a supporter and as somebody that's going to help them out. But I know it also does pay dividends instructionally. When I try a new technology in the classroom and maybe it doesn't go so well, I know my kids are going to be patient with me and supportive of me because we have that relationship and we have that rapport and we have that trust. So that's kind of an educational pro tip that I have for them. And then the other, as a tech person, the other pro tip is, there's not one technology for everybody. There's not one technology for every teacher, and nobody should tell you this is the technology that you should be using. The one that you should be using is the one that meets the needs or goals that you have for what you're trying to do. So if you're in a situation where you're already a formative assessment rock star, for whatever it is that you're doing, if you already know your kid's comprehension of stuff as you're teaching it frontwards and backwards, like the back of your hand, then don't listen to somebody recommending a formative assessment tool to you, because you don't need that. Find the one that meets the things you need. So be reflective of your practice and think, like, what is it that I do improve, or what is it that's missing from my classroom, or what potential like transition problem do I expect to see as we move to face-to-face or virtual or blended or remote or a hybrid model? Like as I move to that, like what gaps do I see in my practice and in my strategies and my tools, and select the tools that help you with those things. That way you're not, that way the work that you're putting in to learn those new technologies, because it is work, that way it truly benefits you and benefits your kids, because it's filling a gap, it's filling a need that you have.
Wow, that's impressive. I agreed with everything you said 100%, especially the part about like just knowing what you're good at and not changing that. You have to just trust yourself.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And if you're a veteran teacher of 25 years, just because you're hopping on technology doesn't mean you have to start using all these tools that people like me as an edtech coach are recommending.
Right.
And I know I have to be very cognizant as I'm recommending tools like, hey, you could use this, you could use that. And then I really have to reframe that. And sometimes I have to simplify and just say, hey, here's one tool. There are several others that do this, but this is probably the easiest to pick up. Or here are some options. It's up to you whether or not you use them.
Right.
That kind of thing. And you really have to go with what you're comfortable with a bit right now. Of course, we're going to be out of our comfort zone. So having those little bits and bites of what, help give you some normalcy are really important. And I like that piece you talked about with trust. I wanted to back up and touch on that. I've been reading the Distance Learning Playbook from Corwin Press. John Hattie's one of the authors. And I'm in module 4 right now. We just finished talking about that today in a staff meeting, and we were able to establish this continuum of teacher credibility that includes trust, competence, immediacy, and dynamism. And I have really just observed that with how you roll out tech, and I can only imagine you're bringing those items back into the classroom. You talked about some of the things you had recommended before, and you wanted to do those with students. Can you give us an example of something you're excited to bring to the classroom this year?
Yeah, so my classroom currently is completely virtual, all online. Kids have classes every day, all completely virtual. And the tools that I'm finding myself leaning heavily on are Flipgrid and Pear Deck. Now, there are a lot of tools in my repertoire that I go to certain times, but the kids are going to be overwhelmed if I roll them all out, all willy-nilly all at the same time. So those are two that I'm really focusing on being really meaningful and deliberate about how I'm rolling them out. And the reason is with Flipgrid, I want to hear all of my students' voices. I want to develop that connection and that trust with them, and Flipgrid's a good way to do it. But also, I had Holly Clark on my podcast recently, and she talked about how, if we're not pressing record when we're tracking students' understanding of something, then we're not truly understanding them. We're doing almost a disservice by having these apps like Flipgrid. It doesn't have to be Flipgrid. There are others, but these different apps and tools that let us hear the kids' voices, advocating for their understanding of things, or not advocating, but advocating for the help they need and explaining the understanding they have. And with tools like that, we could truly understand them and understand not just that one kid that raised their hand, or the one kid that typed in the Google Meet chat, or the one kid that had the guts to go on mic, but all of them. And Pear Deck for the same reason, right? Because I could deliver content and I can also hear back from all my kids, not audio, not like the richness of the feedback I can get from Flipgrid or the assessment I can get from Flipgrid, but more immediate and quick and convenient than Flipgrid might be. Even though Flipgrid is those things, it's not as much as Pear Deck is. And I should say too, the Nearpodies out there, I'm making up that name. They're like, hey, Nearpod does that too, and I'm like, I agree, Nearpod is fantastic too. My school district's a Pear Deck district, so I've got that's the one I have the most usage with right now. But they're both amazing tools, and I think tools like those that can do so many things for you, like I can deliver content to my kids. I can be interactive for my students. I can formatively assess my students. I can make sure my students understand everything. I can get feedback from my students. I can package all of the content of a lesson into one tool, so I'm not clicking into a billion tabs. Tools like that are like super powered tools that can do so many things for me. And I think that's why, Pear Deck or Nearpod and Flipgrid are two tools that I'm really leveraging heavily right now. There are a lot of great ones out there, but those two I just think are super powered tools for me right now.
Yeah, and if you ask me, I would say those two sets of tools. Mm-hmm. So we're in Nearpod district, so it's on, Jake. Oh, we're battling.
Next time we're in battling. Person, we're duking it out.
No, like you said, Pear Deck's good too. I like how it integrates.
It sounded like you really had to force that out there. Like you barely could get that out.
Well, it's kind of funny. So when I started, I was with a different district, and they used Google Classroom and Pear Deck, and I was a Pear Deck guy. And at that time, there were certain data collections that Pear Deck did significantly better than Nearpod. Mm-hmm. And so I was a fanboy. But then, like, I had a friend, Amber Youngman. She turned me on to Nearpod, gave me some of her lessons. I started using them. And then Nearpod kind of, edged a bit ahead in my book. Yeah. They started adding some features like the VR. I geeked out talking about geeking out with the VR experiences. Oh, that was so much fun. And now with their new video,
it's like Edpuzzle built right in there. Yeah.
It's like Edpuzzle, which I like Edpuzzle too, but now I don't have to go to another tool. I just stay on Nearpod.
Right.
So I really like that feature as well. It's really nice. I would add one more, whatever LMS that you're using. If your school has a CMS or LMS, so content management system like Google Classroom, or an LMS like Canvas or Schoology, or maybe you have Otus. There's a bunch of them out there. So
Otus, you're just making up things now. I've never heard of that before. Making up LMSs.
No, those guys are hardcore. They gave me a really hard time at ISTE because I was wearing a Schoology shirt, and I went over to their little burrito truck to get my free burrito at ISTE last year. And they tried to upsell me.
You can't have a burrito, you Schoology guy.
Yeah, we got to talk. We got to talk before you get your burrito. Everybody else is cool, but you Schoology guy, you got to listen to us talk a little bit before you get this burrito.
Nice. Well, I like Otus now. If they give away burritos, I'm in.
Yeah, at ISTE. But Schoology gives away so much more. You got to stop by their booth at the next ISTE or FETC.
If it's not burritos, I'm out.
Yeah, it's not burritos.
Is it tacos?
Not burritos. You get some pretty cool swag though.
Okay.
I just got to laugh for a moment here. Good times. Definitely got to check out the podcast too that we did on Jake's show, the EDU duct tape. So check that out. A lot of fun. I'm going to go off on a tangent.
Okay.
And just say I found a collectible. I'm really excited. This has nothing to do with education, but I'm throwing it on here.
Right.
I found a Robin Hood lunch pail, like Disney's Robin Hood.
Okay.
It's pretty sweet. I'm excited because I saw all the cool stuff that you had in the background. You had the starting lineup guys in the back. You had the Funkos.
Yeah.
Matthew Ketchum's got a big Funko collection and a lot of like different like superhero themed Lego collections, and so made me think of that.
I always try to tell my kids, like we go by this like little comic store in our town. It's like a comics and like fun stuff kind of store. I don't even know what you'd call it. And I'm like, oh, look at those new Funko Pops that are out. Did you see they've got? Oh, look at those Stranger Things ones. Ooh, they've got Mandalorian ones now. Those are pretty neat. Like just hoping that the next time they have to get me a gift, they'll think of that, and they don't. So I don't know. Like my wife might get concerned if I start buying them for myself, but I think I've got to just start doing it because the kids aren't taking the hints.
I did do that with Legos. Like, oh, you know what? our oldest, he's getting a little bit bigger. I think he's ready for those Technic sets. Like, there's that one with the Porsche, and then there's the Millennium Falcon. But those things are sold out in stores. I should have got it before
should've.
he was ready for it.
Yeah, you should have, and then not shared it with him.
Yeah.
So
could have shared the minifigs. Here you go.
Right,
Here's Han Solo. Go have fun.
So the lunchbox, the Robin Hood lunchbox, is it the Robin Hood that was the fox?
Yeah.
Have you been using it? Have you been taking it to school? I feel like you should take it to school one day with your lunch in it.
I should. So I'm working remotely right now.
Okay.
Have a baby on the way, and we get an exemption. I'm really blessed because we have kids under the age of 12. My district gives us the option to either report to our site or work remotely. And I just love my setup at home with my desktop and the dual monitors. And then I'll pull up my laptop and have 3 monitors sometimes. I did a training, and so talking about geeking out, that was great. I was like bringing things in and out with lightning fast speed the other day.
People are like, "How's he doing this?" And you're like, "I'm bringing it from another monitor." And they're like, "You could have another monitor." I'm like, "I've got 3, right?"
Yes, exactly. And we're blessed too in our district. We're most of the teachers have 2 monitors, so they have their Surface Pro, which is their main monitor, and then they have a side monitor that plugs into this little brick thing that plugs into the Surface Pro.
Yeah. So now you're like Tom Cruise in the Minority Report, like swiping things in. Was that the show where he had like the computer on the wall or something like that?
Think about that. We're so close to that.
That's you.
So close to that kind of technology. I've researched that kind of stuff, and AI's coming along, which, leads me to the next part. Have you had a chance to try out the AI in Microsoft's transcription tool that just came out last week?
I have not tried it out, but I watched your video on it, and I think I just tweeted it. Maybe it was today. I don't know. I was just watching it. It's really cool how it's bringing in the different languages and the transcription and everything. It's really rad. Yeah, I saw your video on it.
Yeah, more is coming. And so I have this theory. I haven't, tested it fully or checked with anyone from Microsoft like Mike Tholfsen, but I'm thinking the transcription for that is a bit longer than if you dictate talk to text. And I just saw recently, like right before we started the show, you posted something about the iPhone doing a talk to text, right? Or Google Translate.
Google
Translate on the iOS app.
Yeah, so it came out on Android back in April or May or something, and they just added it to the iOS app in August, and so now they do like live conversation. So I could set my phone in between me and somebody speaking whatever other language, assuming it's one of the ones that it covers, which is I think in that app it's still limited in that feature to like the dozen most common languages or something. And I could set it in between us and identify what the 2 languages are, and you don't even have to tell it who's going to talk. Just like one person talks, and then it plays that back in the other person's language. And then that person can talk in their language, and it'll play back in the other person's language. Like it just keeps translating for you live in the middle of a discussion.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing we need to utilize more for our parent conversations.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm really hopeful with this transcription tool. Even though it takes longer, it is so accurate. You got to try it with your podcast.
Yeah.
And see. And it's really helping me because I use all these filler words like, I'll drag out words. It has a hard time with that, and it'll mess up. And so that's kind of like my micro teaching moment. I love John Hattie and visible learning. So I'm always trying to use that micro teaching to get better, always trying to improve and see what I can do better. And that's definitely one area that is like just been shoved in my face. Like, ooh, you use too often.
Right. Yeah.
You have these long pauses, and on certain words, you need to enunciate more clearly.
Mm-hmm.
But if I do that, it is near perfect. Like I've been trying to get it perfect, and it's almost there. If I enunciate clearly, use familiar phrases. So if I use our educational acronyms, it won't pick it up.
Right.
It'll come up with something weird. Or I was talking about Edu Protocols from John Carippo, and it messed that up. It said like Edge something protocols.
Right. That's what I get. That's what I get for educational duct tape too. I get something funky like that.
Yeah, but I think if you kind of train yourself to work with the AI and you say something like EDU protocols and you enunciate really clear and you have that pause, you're good. And then for some of the things, you can just do a find and replace. Like if you know certain words, it's going to mess up and give you this alternative that you don't need. Just do a find and replace with that.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping, we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping to get some more of my episodes transcribed or take some of these nuggets and publish those. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I encourage everyone. Yeah. So what else is new on your end in the world of tech? Since you're not in this tech integration specialist role, are you going to keep rolling out these amazing GIFs and how-tos and tutorials?
Yeah, I mean, I can't stop, man. It's my passion. The only thing that's slowing me down right now is my eyes. I mean, at the end of a day on Google Meets and Zooms with the kids, I'm like, I just need a break from the screen. But whenever my eyes and my brain allows me to do it, like I just can't stop making the GIFs and the guides and the tweets and the podcasts and stuff like that. It's become a passion for me. Like I just love supporting the educators in this stuff. You know, once I have the information, I'm like, why wouldn't I share it with them?
Yeah, that's amazing. I look forward to those. And I want to share just like a personal note. I'm going to toot your own horn for a moment here.
Oh, thanks. Oh, great.
Go ahead. I realized you were a stand-up guy for the very first time when I had asked you for something that you did not create. I was like, hey, where is this Google thing? Yeah. And you were like, hey, that wasn't me. I think that was Tony Vincent. Here you go. Is this what you were looking for?
It probably was.
Like, yeah.
Everything was Tony.
Yeah. He's a good guy too.
Yeah.
But I was like, hey, how many people really do that? Now, a lot of educators do that, right?
Yeah,
because educators have big hearts. But for me, that was like a pivotal moment. Like it really just re-emphasized the need to just share.
Yeah.
And to give freely. Like I wasn't asking for one of your things, and rather than not respond, you went out of your way and you researched it for me and you found it.
I can't even imagine being like, was me ignoring it. Delete. Delete. Ignore conversation. No, I'm gonna help you out, man. And anybody that helps me out. It's sometimes the tweets come in and the people are like, hey, Jake Miller Tech, how do I do this with this thing? But it's so cool because the teacher is asking me a question that's like, I have this specific thing I'm trying to achieve for my students and I don't know how to do it. How do I do it? And I'm like, oh, well, my hat goes off to this educator who's like, I'm trying to do this for kids. Can somebody please help me? And they're linking to me and I'm like, I will help you. I will help you with that. You know, it's not like they're asking me for something ridiculous. They're asking me for something that helps kids. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to help kids. I will sign on for that every time.
Yeah, and if you don't know it, then you're learning too. I'm sure it'll come up again. I'm finding that out a lot. I'm taking on more of these side projects, and they're taking me down like these little good rabbit holes. You know, they're not too deep, but like, hey, how do you do this on Schoology? Or hey, can you app smash these 2 apps or these 3 apps? Like, can you app smash these 5 things? It's like, yes. Okay. Here we go.
Me. You're like, ooh, I don't know, but that sounds like fun. Let's figure it out, right?
Yeah, and it's something they tend to be very specific.
Right.
Like, I can't think of anything offhand. Oh, I can think of one, like a very particular type of scavenger hunt on Schoology. So I got that question recently, and so I'm going to have to do a video on that. They wanted something specifically for the start of the year for secondary students. I'm like, oh, okay, I found some elementary stuff. I have some bits I've done, but we'll have to go a little bit deeper. So it's kind of neat. And you talked about app smashing a little bit. with Pear Deck and Flipgrid. I've been really big into app smashing Flipgrid with Adobe Spark. That is like my jam right now. I use that app every day.
So are you like making videos in Spark and they're becoming the resource in a Flipgrid prompt, you mean?
So here's what I'm using it for. I'm starting out with graphics in Adobe Spark, bringing it into Flipgrid, then bringing those Flipgrid videos back into Spark. So finding the things that each program does well and really using those to make an even better video.
Nice.
So one thing I'm helping a teacher do is make a music video for her students. So it's a music teacher. She wants them to kind of have them show themselves playing their instruments, but then also have like photo and slide montages in there, like a music video might. Yeah. So it's a little more complicated, but our tools are a little limited. We don't have anything like WeVideo. We do have Adobe Rush, and I think that's the next step. I think I forgot about that one when I started investigating this, but I wanted to see if it was possible, and it's totally possible with Flipgrid and Adobe Spark.
Yeah, record the videos in Flipgrid, pull them out, edit them in Spark. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so I'm excited. Can't wait till those kids create those music videos. And if I'm able to get permission, I'll have to share them back out. So yeah, we'll see. Usually parents are pretty good. When you share out student work, I think I generally get a yes. I don't know that I've ever asked and gotten a no, actually, right. Now that I think about it.
You're
I think
like,
the
hey,
answer's always yes.
Yeah, your kid made this really cool thing. Do you mind if I share it with the world and tell them how awesome your kid is? And the parent's like, yes, please do that. Right?
Yeah, and it's definitely important to, not just share it out.
Right,
you gotta ask. You gotta make sure it's okay. But I did that last year with a student that was very, very shy, very reclusive, and kind of standoffish in some ways. A very sweet kiddo. And they created this video game for To Kill a Mockingbird. And I thought it was amazing. It was highly detailed. They didn't have a lot of time in class to work on it. So they had spent a number of hours outside of class teaching themselves to code, basic code, but still they had to create all these sprites and do all this basic Scratch. And I didn't teach them any of that. They used their Genius Hour time to do that. And I thought, this is fantastic. Let me share it out with the world. And the response was great. And I let them know, hey, like 31,000 people saw this post. And she just like lit up. It was such an amazing moment. And I'm going to miss things like that. So you talked about wanting to get back in the classroom. While I absolutely love what I do, I can see the need to want to get back into the classroom. Like I am missing it, not missing it so much to go right back in. Like I want to, do this thing for a while and get really good at this. But then I do want to take some of these ideas and bring them back into the class. I was thinking, how cool would it be if I could do like a sabbatical, kind of like go back into the class for a year, then come back and do this. So I don't know if I have my way, that's how I would do it.
That's kind of interesting. Like switch back and forth between tech coaching and teaching. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, I've noticed a trend, and I could be wrong. There's no like empirical evidence on this, but it seems to me, just watching people, you seem to get a little more distanced from what's happening in the classroom at about year 4 out of the classroom. Like a little bit. You're not as relevant. Doesn't mean you're irrelevant, but you start becoming less relevant the longer you're out. And I think it's important to plug yourself back in some way. And I think really good admin and really good tech coaches really keep up their skills by like modeling lessons and, checking in with the boots on the ground, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of approach I want to take. Once I get a little better, I'm still floundering. This is all new. It's like I'm drinking from a fire hose right now with the onslaught. I don't know how many emails and questions I troubleshooted and answered today. Well over 100.
I believe it.
I would say maybe close to a couple hundred, maybe more. I completely lost track, and
Now,
my brain is mush.
How many of those emails were asking for like beard tips, like beard maintenance tips? Because I got to know, like this guy's got it. He's got it under control. I'm going to ask him.
None.
What? I'm emailing you tomorrow.
Sounds good. Send all the beard questions my way, guys. Right. No, I did get one this weekend, though. I did get some on the side. I got some DMs asking about beard care.
Beard DMs, nice.
On Twitter, I do get that. Awesome. Hey, I like your beard. How did you grow it? Mine's a little patchy.
How did you grow it? I focused all my energy on my face. It just came out.
Yes, it's my superpower. I'm hoping to get it trimmed up soon. It's starting to bug me. It's getting a little too big, and I don't trust anyone other than my barber, but I heard a rumor that in my area, barbershops are opening up soon. So I'm hoping I can get in before the baby comes in October, and I can be looking all snazzy again for those baby pictures. So you'll know when I post the baby pics, whether I made it to the barber or not. It'll be pretty evident. I may look like Grizzly Adams. Hopefully not, though. I think if I'm desperate, I'll just have my mom or my wife trim me up because it's got to go. So talking about all this tech and the landscape kind of changing and all of the ebbs and flows, how do you think education's going to evolve post 2020, like 5 years from now? What do you think it's going to look like?
Well, I think hopefully, obviously, we're going to be back into a state of normalcy, back in our classrooms with our students and our full classes and everything like that. But I think hopefully that'll go back to normal. But I think the one thing that will never go back to normal is the way our teachers integrate technology. And I mean that in a good way, because our educators, and this as a tech coach, and I've known this for the last 5 years as a tech coach and as just, person podcasting and speaking about technology integration, was you were begging educators to integrate technology in ways that were relevant to them, right? Like you were saying, like, oh, you should try these new technologies, and they're like, no, that's okay. And the message I was trying to get them to understand, they weren't saying it was okay because they didn't want to do it. They were just overwhelmed, right? And the message I was trying to get them to understand was, no, identify a need you have or a goal you have or a problem you have, and identify technologies to support you with that. And it wasn't it wasn't clicking for some educators. But you look at what happened in February or March or whenever, your schools might have closed down or went partially virtual or whatever. All of a sudden, educators learned how to use Zoom or Google Meet or or Microsoft Teams and Screencastify or Loom or whatever, and Flipgrid and Pear Deck or Nearpod. And you're like, man, how did you go for years without integrating many new technologies? But then in a month, you learn to integrate like 5 new higher level technologies. And they're like, well, I needed to, right? I identified this need that I had. Like I needed to synchronously talk to my students. I needed to hear my students' voices. I needed to formatively assess them, and my normal modes of doing that face-to-face were gone. So I learned these new technologies that let me do that. And I think that mindset will never really go away from our educators. I hope it won't, where even if they're face-to-face, like they won't need Zoom or Google Meet anymore, but they will have the mindset of, hey, when I realized that I needed to synchronously talk to my students, all I had to do was figure out what technology will support me with that. And so hopefully in the future, when they realize, hey, I need to, review previous concepts with my students. I don't know what it is. It's something. I need to do this. They'll say, hey, what technology will help me with that? A lot of educators didn't used to say that, hey, what technology will help me with that? But now I think that's become part of their mindset. And so I think that our teachers are going to be so much more willing to integrate technologies because that's now a part of their mindset. I hope.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I agree. I don't want that to go away either.
Right.
And I want them to get their lives back in some way. Like, use tech to save you time.
Right.
Use the planning tools. You don't necessarily need to just substitute. Like, if you're going to write an essay and you're going to handwrite it,
Right.
that doesn't mean you just, have them type it up on a word processor.
Right.
But no, the way you kind of outline things or share instructions, that's another reason why I like the transcribe feature.
Mhm.
What I'm hoping to do is and now it's a little complicated. It's a little more advanced. It's not like a low entry point for teachers, but I'm hoping they'll record the key parts of their lesson. So if students need to review them, they can review them asynchronously.
Mhm.
And then additionally, for our ELs, special needs students, I'm hoping our teachers will take the extra step and strip the audio from the video files and transcribe them into written directions rather than, type it all out themselves. Just use this tool. It does a really good job, like I said. And then take the key parts that you need. There might be some slight formatting, but once you use it enough, I think like anything else, you're going to develop a workflow for it, and it's going to be more seamless and streamlined. And then you could share that out and even put graphics for your ELs and special needs students. And if you're using something like Immersive Reader, it can read it back to them, right? They can change the font, all that cool stuff that Immersive Reader does. So it's a little more advanced, but I think the benefits are just so overwhelmingly good. So that's where I want to get to. I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
And I know it's very ambitious and it probably won't happen. But if I can get some teachers there, I'm going to be really happy.
Well, I think it'll happen for any teacher that realizes that's a need that they have, right? If we, I forget how's the saying go. Like, if you want something bad enough, you'll find a way to do it, or you'll find time to make it happen. And if you don't want it, you'll find an excuse, right? So the teachers that don't see that as a need probably aren't going to put the time into it. But those teachers that go like, hey, I have this ELL population, my video is in English, and they're not able to understand anything out of it currently. How can I support them with it? And if you're like, hey, you could use the transcribe feature to pull all the text from it, and then you could pop it into an Immersive Reader, and they could have it read to them right there, and you can make graphics that they'll understand. Those teachers might go like, oh, yeah, I want that. That is what I want for my students, and then they'll do it, But they've got to have that need there. They've got to have that reason, that purpose for doing it.
Yeah, thanks for your wisdom there. You really frame that
you
in
can call
the
me Yoda.
best way. Yeah, because why do it if you don't need it?
Right.
You may not need it.
Right.
You really may not. Maybe you're having honors kids, and that doesn't apply. Why should you know, do that if it's not going to work? Don't use it. And so I really appreciate you reframing it in that way, because it really gets at the heart of what's important. You have to have that need. Identifying that need is a key piece, and then finding what's going to help you meet that need. Talking about meeting needs, who are some people that kind of fill your bucket on Twitter and our listeners should follow?
Well, let's go two different directions with that. So one is talking about exactly what we were talking about right there. Like, this wasn't front of mind to talk about until we were talking about that thing there. But the work of Dan Pink. I don't know if you've read Drive by Daniel Pink. I have not read his other books yet. I intend to. I heard To Sell as Human is amazing. But the book Drive, he talks about what motivates humans, and I feel like that book is a lot of why I understand that an educator is not going to use a tech tool just because somebody said so. They're going to use it because these are the framework. This is the framework of what motivates humans. And this is what's going to motivate a teacher to learn to use that tech tool. And so it's some of the mistakes I made early on as a tech coach were because I didn't have that understanding. So that book really helped me with that Drive by Daniel Pink. But then inside of education, Let's see, who have I been excited about the stuff from lately? The Merrills, Joe and Kristen, everything they share on Twitter. Like, here's my favorite thing about Joe and Kristen. Even if it's something that I've already done with Flipgrid or Seesaw, they frame it in just such a fun, engaging way for the teacher and for the student that I'm always excited about it. So their work is always fun for me to follow. I've been enjoying the work of Natasha Rochelle a lot lately because Natasha, she is both a Microsoftie, as I call them, and a Googler. And so I know I can go to Natasha and learn about both things. And she's just a super nice person, too. And then one person I've been turning to for videos lately, I think you and I might have been tweeting about this the other day, is Sethi de Klerk. Sethi's in Thailand, and he makes videos on different technology tools all over the spectrum, and his videos are just always on point. So he's one guy I always go to for a good tutorial. If I'm like, how do I do this in Zoom? I'm going to go check Sethi's webpage or Sethi's YouTube channel, because I'm sure he's got it.
Super high quality videos too.
Oh yeah.
So I need to get like a little mini studio over here in my office because the lighting's not nearly as good, and I do a lot of screencast videos just because, it's not ideal where I'm at. So I am working on shaping that up, and I like the setup you have too. It's very inviting.
Thanks.
Yeah. What's like a content creation source that inspires you? Like, where do you go to, kind of fill your bucket?
So years ago, maybe 7 years ago, a friend of mine gave me the book, What to Do When It's Your Turn, and It's Always Your Turn, by Seth Godin. And that book blew me away and lit a fire underneath me that is still burning now. Like anything that I'm doing now, like whether it's the podcast or anything that I'm speaking about or being on your show, like any of these things, you could trace back at least a little bit of that fire back to that book. And because I continue to follow all of Seth's work. Seth he's not an education. Well, he does have opinions in education, and he does teach courses for adults, in marketing and things like that. But he is a blogger and author and podcaster, and he has a podcast called Akimbo, Akimbo. And that's amazing. I listen to every episode, and it's always good. And I bring so many nuggets away from every one of those episodes. He's amazing.
Oh, that reminds me of Gary V.
Oh, similar kind of idea, like different styles, but similar kind of guys.
Yeah, just listen to one of Gary V's podcasts, and I always leave with something. It doesn't matter if it's a 5-minute clip or a 2-hour long podcast that he does. Like, there is always something, and I can go deeper with it, and it sticks. I really admire that. That's an art, and his story is so motivating to me too. That's one of the reasons why I teach. I want to give people like Gary V a voice. Let them know they have a voice. Like they have a choice too in school. Like it's there to help you, and it can open doors. But I understand the limits that we place upon our students that inhibit what they can become and what they desire to become. And I do my best when I'm in the classroom, and now through teachers, trying to empower them to do the same things. Like, take the training wheels off here. If a student's ready to go, let them go. If they want to explore this area, give them an opportunity. Find a way to integrate their interests into your content. It's possible, but like you said, you have to want it.
Right.
If you don't want it, it's not going to happen. But if you want it and you make the time, you'll do it.
Oh yeah,
and it's going to be life altering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
yeah. That's what excites me about education so much. I know we've talked a lot about tech and gone a little bit away from like school reopenings. Do you have any like pro tips for tech or school reopenings? I know like really broad, but just any kinds of pro tips for the audience.
Yeah. So if we're thinking about focus on reopening, and when I think reopening, I think teaching in a circumstance that is different from the circumstance you most recently taught in, right? So whether that's all of a sudden you're completely virtual, or you're completely hybrid, or you're in person and you were just virtual, or you're in person and you only have 12 kids in the room instead of 30 kids in the room, and they're sitting 6 feet apart and there's walls between them, and I don't even know what these situations are. I think the pro tip is to not try to do too many things at once, not try to change too many aspects of what you're doing at once. Don't water down your effect. Try to make one change at a time. And there's something that I talked about on a recent podcast too, which was, and it came from Seth Godin actually, and he talks about the phrase merely ship it. Like, don't wait until something's perfect. Just merely ship it. Like, the only way, get it as good as you can. Don't hold on to this until it's perfect. You've got to get it out there, and then you'll find out how it impacts your students, and then you'll see if it's good enough, and then you'll see where the things are that need improved in it. But you can't find those things out until you get it out there, until you try it out, until you give it a test run.
Yes, and that's the advice I wish I had and wish I had taken to heart when I was a graphic designer. That was one of the key reasons that I failed. It's because I was too concerned about being a perfectionist,
right,
and making something perfect every single time instead of merely shipping it, and getting it out there to the client, and then maybe even seeing what did they have. Like, it would have been better if I sent them an unfinished product,
right,
but that was halfway done earlier than sending them this finished product, which, still wasn't perfect, or, wasn't their idea of perfect.
Right. Maybe it was your perfect and it wasn't their perfect, and you put so much time into it, you didn't know it until you got there. Yeah.
Yeah. And what you said exactly, that's what would happen. So frustrating, but it took all that pain and time for me to reflect upon my mistakes and figure out. I didn't have anybody to really point that out and say, hey, just fix this. But once I fixed it, made me very ready to do what I'm doing now in education. And so without really being told that, I kind of just figured it out. But I love this. Whatever you're doing, when you do it well, you got to keep it simple. So this phrase, merely ship it.
Yeah.
Anybody can remember that pretty much, even if you have next to no memory. It's such a short and very pointed, and well-rounded phrase. I love that. I'm going to really reflect on that. And speaking of reflecting, what's one piece of advice you'd like to leave the audience with?
So one of my favorite quotes, I try to reference it whenever I'm presenting to educators, comes from Dr. Maya Angelou, and it's a familiar quote to a lot of people. But she said, "Do the best you can until you know better, and then when you know better, do better." And the reason I share that with educators so often, it kind of goes back to that merely shipping it part, is that we expect perfection of ourselves as educators. We expect ourselves to do all of the things, and we beat ourselves up when we don't do things perfectly, and when a lesson flops, and when a student fails, and when a kid isn't motivated, or when there's a behavior issue. These all feel bad. But I think what we need to keep in mind is that all anybody can expect of us is to do the best we can, right? And then the next step, the important step, is that when we know better, when we learn something that works more effectively than that, or when we reflect on something we did and can identify an improvement, that we then do better. So you do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, you do better. Now, ironically, that kind of goes back to that merely ship it, right? Because part of the merely ship it part is you put out the best thing that you can in a fair amount of time, and then you learn from it and do better, right? You don't just merely ship it, and that's what's always out there. You do the best you can until that doing leads you to knowing better, and then once you know better, then you do better. But I feel like educators need permission to know, hey, just do the best you can, right? And then when you learn that next step, then when you learn about that new tech tool, then when you learn about that new strategy, then when you reflect on a lesson and see what flopped, then you do better. It's okay. You were doing the best you could. Now you know better. Now do better.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, tying it all in and put in a little bow on it, in terms of school reopenings and going back to these different situations that you're not used to and that are making you feel like a first-year teacher all over again. Give yourself some grace with all of that.
Yeah, yeah.
You have to forgive yourself for the things you don't know, but you have to do your best. Put out what you can.
Yeah.
And then just learn from it and take it to heart. And when you come back, next year, even if we're not in a similar environment and things go back to quote unquote normal, you're going to be so amazing. I firmly believe that. And I'm seeing that if you maintain this positivity and you look at this as not a defeat or an insurmountable challenge, but a learning experience, you're going to change the world. No doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yep. Superpowers.
Well, Jake, thanks so much for being on. I really appreciate it. Whenever you're on the mic, you're fire. So
thanks, man. It's my pleasure to be here. Everybody that's listening now, you've got to go listen to Scott on my show, right? Now you're listening to me on this show, and then you got to go listen to Scott's other show. And then I don't even know where else to direct them, but this is a huge honor to be on this show, Scott. I'm just psyched about it.
I'm going to direct them to your Twitter. So follow Jake at Jake Miller Tech. So it's an easy one. So you can't forget it. Jake Miller Tech.
Yep.
And check out his podcast, EDU Duct Tape, like not duck. Right. Some of us are still learning that.
Not duck like quack quack. Yep.
Yeah, not quack quack. Duct like an air duct.
Yes.
And duct tape. Well, thank you all for listening. It's been a pleasure having Jake on. And stay tuned for more goodness.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you for listening to Education Today. It is my pleasure to share with you all. Let's stay connected on Twitter. You can find me at Mr. Nunes Teach. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast on the player of your choice and give Education Today a positive review on Apple Podcasts. Remember, everyone, out here in this field of education, it's grind time.
All right, friends, that does it. I hope that you enjoyed this bonus episode of the Educational Duct Tape podcast, where I had the honor of sitting down and talk with Scott Nunes on the Education Today podcast. I hope you'll go to subscribe to Scott's podcast to hear more of the greatness that he does on his show, as well as his other podcast that he hosts with Matthew Ketchum. That one is titled TNT EdTech. I'll be back with another episode of the Educational Duct Tape podcast next week, where my guest will be Joe Marquez. Have a really great conversation with Joe coming up for you. I know that you will enjoy it, and I hope that you'll come back to listen. I hope you'll subscribe so you make sure you don't miss out on it. All right, well, I will see you next week for that episode. As always, as a parent, I am grateful for you, and as an educator, I am proud of the work that you do. Have a great one, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. Please visit eduducttape.com to join the discussion, share possible topics, inquire about being a guest, or contact Jake. And remember, duct is spelled with a T, not a quack quack K.